climate crisis is also top of mind for many voters. The Mississippi River is at historically low levels, which could impact the food supply and our wallets.
The Army Corps of Engineers recently discovered a secret that they did not want the public to see. While the news talks about a drought, the water science shows that the river is losing 53,000 cubic feet of water every second. That is the entire flow of the Colorado River just vanishing into thin air. Hands down, this is the biggest mystery in American nature right now. The water is not evaporating, and it is not being taken by farmers. It is simply gone. Watching this unfold is like seeing a ghost story happen to a giant piece of nature. Secrets buried under river mud. The Mississippi River is the second largest river in the United States, but lately it has started to look like a small creek in some places. It is a massive problem because this river is the main road for the food grown in the middle of the country. It helps move $400 billion in goods every single year and supports over 1 million jobs. Right now, there are more than 120 ships and nearly 2,000 barges stuck on sandbars. The water near Memphis is less than 3 feet deep. This is the lowest the river has been since people started keeping track back in 1872. Usually, a river changes this much over hundreds of years, but this time it only took 18 months for the water to fall. Something very weird is going on because the weather does not explain this. In 2023, the rainfall in the upper part of the river was 34.2 inches. That is exactly the same as the average for the last 50 years. The water is falling from the sky like it always does, but it is not staying in the river. This has caused the Coast Guard to put up major restrictions on where boats can go. Some parts of the river are losing 200 billion gallons of water every single day. NASA took pictures from space that show the river looks like a thin blue line compared to how it used to be. The Army Corps of Engineers has been trying to figure out where the water is going, but what they found is very disturbing. The findings are so strange that some government groups have started to hide the data from the public. They know that if people understood what was really happening, there would be a lot of fear. It is not just a drought that is causing the ships to get stuck, it is a total failure of the river system. The river is the blood of the American economy, and it is currently bleeding out into the ground. If this continues, the entire way we move food and goods across the country will break down. This is much more than a weather story. The mystery of the disappearing water is only the beginning of a much larger and darker problem. Reality of vanishing current. A scientist named Amanda Winters spent her whole life studying how rivers move and flow. In September of 2023, she found something that she could not explain. Her team used special underwater sonar tools to measure how much water was passing by. These tools are very smart and usually never make mistakes. The math is simple. You measure how much water goes into a section of the river and you should see the same amount coming out at the other end. But in the Mississippi, the math was broken. When they measured the water at Memphis, it was over 300,000 cubic feet per second. When that same water should have arrived at Baton Rouge 7 days later, it was much less. About 53,000 cubic feet per second had just vanished across 600 miles of river. That is like 34 million gallons of water disappearing every single minute. Dr. Winters thought her tools were broken, so she checked them again and again. She even sent her data to other labs, but the result was always the same. The water was leaving the river and nobody could see where it was going. By the start of 2024, the amount of missing water got even bigger. It went from 53,000 to over 140,000 cubic feet per second. This much water could fill up Lake Tahoe every 11 days. It is a huge amount of water that is just not there anymore. It is not being used by farms, and it is not evaporating into the clouds. The law of science says that mass cannot just disappear, but the Mississippi was proving that law wrong. This made engineers and scientists very worried because it meant they did not understand the river at all. This missing water is causing the river to drop to levels not seen in over 30 years. This is dangerous because it threatens the drinking water for millions of people and ruins the supply chain for the whole country. When the water gets this low, it affects our wallets because food becomes more expensive. The situation became so bad that the Army Corps of Engineers had to have a secret meeting to discuss it. They found that the water loss was 6 times higher than anything they had ever seen in history. The government decided to stop sharing the real-time data with the public while they looked for an answer. Suction from deep Earth. To find the truth, geologists put down over 100 ground sensors to look deep under the river. They used sound waves to see what the Earth looked like 2,000 feet below the water. What they found changed everything they knew about the Mississippi. The ground under the river channel was changing. The space between the sand and dirt, which scientists call sponginess, was getting much bigger. Usually the sponginess is around 30%, but now it was almost 50%. The bottom of the river was turning into a giant sponge. This means the riverbed itself was becoming a drain, but a drain only works if something is pulling the water down. That is where the aquifers come in. An aquifer is like a giant underground lake made of sand and water. Millions of people get their drinking water from these underground spots. Since the 1960s, people have been pumping so much water out of the ground that the water level down there has dropped by 23 feet. This created a giant empty space with very low pressure. This low pressure acts like a vacuum cleaner. Because the riverbed is now so spongy, the low pressure from the empty aquifer is sucking the river water straight down into the earth. The Mississippi is not drying up because of the sun. It is being pulled into a giant hole we created by pumping out too much groundwater. It is a huge cycle of loss that is happening faster and faster every day. The more water we pump out for cities and farms, the harder the earth sucks the river water down to fill the gap. This is a structural change in how the earth is put together. The river is literally digging itself out from the inside. Scientists are now saying that every textbook on how rivers work needs to be rewritten. We always thought the river stayed on top of the ground, but now we know it is falling through it. This is a scary thought because it means we cannot just fix it by waiting for rain. The very ground the river sits on is broken. The damage we have done to the underground water systems is now coming back to haunt the surface. Coastline under attack from within. We did not break the river with one big mistake. Instead, we broke it with 10,000 small ones over the last 100 years. We built dams, levees, and walls to try and control the water. We drilled thousands of wells to support big farms. Every single one of these choices changed how the water and the ground worked together. Now, the river is reacting to all those changes at once. The Army Corps of Engineers tried to release more water from dams upstream to help, but it did not work. The extra water just got sucked into the spongy ground before it could reach the ocean. This has created a nightmare for people living in Louisiana. Because the river is not pushing enough fresh water toward the ocean, the salt water from the Gulf of Mexico is moving inland. In early 2025, the salt water reached the pipes that provide drinking water for 80,000 people. They lost their clean water overnight. Salt water ruins the pipes and makes the water impossible to drink or use for crops. It is like the ocean is invading the land because the river is too weak to fight back. Engineers call this a storage deadlock. The water is still there, but it is trapped in the deep ground where we cannot reach it or use it. It might stay down there for hundreds of years. This affects the 400 types of animals that live in the river and the $10 billion that the river brings to cities like New Orleans. Even if you do not live near the water, you feel the impact every time you buy something that was shipped on a barge. The entire economy is built on a river that is currently disappearing into a hole. The cost of fixing this might be more than the country can afford to pay. We are finding out that nature does not care about our engineering plans. It responds to the weight of everything we have done over the last century. The river is moving on its own time, and it is currently moving away from us. People are starting to wonder if we can ever bring the mighty Mississippi back to its old self. The silent retreat of the water is a warning that we have pushed the natural system too far. Silent end to mighty flow. Are we truly solving the crisis, or are we merely financing a brief reprieve? This is the existential inquiry that policymakers and engineers avoid with practiced precision. Today, the water levels continue their relentless recession, and a heavy, unnatural silence is colonizing the stretches where the Mississippi once roared. We have spent over a century constructing sophisticated systems to harness, divert, and commodify this river, yet it is these very interventions that have rendered the current disaster a statistical certainty. The water is not simply evaporating, it is being reclaimed by the earth, descending into the cavernous, dark voids formed during the retreat of the Pleistocene glaciers. This is a silent subterranean migration, a descent of 200 billion gallons every single day. The mystery of the vanishing river reveals a fundamental dissonance in our understanding of planetary mechanics. The prevailing narrative suggests that this collapse is a sudden anomaly, a black swan event born of overnight shifts. However, a rigorous analysis proves it is the cumulative result of decades spent ignoring the subtle feedback loops of the fluvial system. We treated the river as a static pipe for commerce rather than a dynamic, living component of the Earth's crust. By over-engineering the surface to ensure predictable navigation, we inadvertently disrupted the hydrostatic equilibrium. When the pressure within the alluvial aquifers is depleted through industrial extraction and the redirection of natural flow, the structural integrity of the riverbed is compromised. As the adage of geophysics suggests, when we extract too much from the foundation, the ceiling eventually yields. This is the bleeding out of the heartland, a physical response to a century of ecological debt. The laws of thermodynamics and fluid mechanics do not bend for human convenience. Water follows the path of least resistance and moves toward the lowest pressure gradient. Currently, that gradient lies deep beneath our feet in the ancient subterranean reservoirs that have remained dormant for millennia. The sound of this receding water is a lonely, haunting frequency for the 10 million people whose lives, economies, and identities are tethered to the river's pulse. We are witnessing a systemic failure where the solutions of the past, levees, locks, and concrete armoring, now act as catalysts for the river's disappearance. These structures have prevented the natural siltation processes that once sealed the riverbed. Without this natural lining, the Mississippi is effectively a leaky vessel, draining into the void at an accelerating rate. The story of the Mississippi serves as a grim masterclass in the dangers of compartmentalized thinking. We cannot save the surface if we continue to ignore the subterranean. To preserve this vital waterway, we must look beyond the immediate visibility of the waterline and analyze the deep geological structures we have spent a century destabilizing. The future of the American heartland depends on a radical shift from control to alignment. If we fail to understand the ground we walk on and the hidden architecture of the water we drink, the river will continue its silent exit. The question remains whether we possess the collective will to halt this vanishing act before the river's roar is lost to history for good. If the world's most famous river can just vanish into the ground, are any of our water supplies actually safe? Give this a like and subscribe for more mysteries. What do you think?